Good morning. So we have a problem. Our incentives are not aligned. But this is a DevOps Days, so I'm sure each and every one of you has seen this wall of confusion at least once in your career so far, where we have devs on one side throwing stuff over the wall to the operators on the other side, who are then left to deal with it. But I have bad news for you. We in Dev and we in Ops are not the only ones with an exclusive ownership of this wall of confusion. We are not the only ones who have our incentives misaligned. In fact, on one side of this wall, you might find the business. And the truth is, the business, many in the business side of the house actually have trouble even distinguishing the difference between Dev and Ops. They just throw their requirements over the wall to IT. Let IT sort it out. Let the technologists figure it out. But what is the business? Who is the business? What does the business do? I want you to think right now in your organization, who are the business people? I think in IT all the time, we talk about them and we kind of throw up the air quotes, or we think about, oh, it's the business. We have to do the business. Well, the business, they do businessy things, like sales and marketing and finance and accounting, all of those things. Those things are important to the running of your company. But when they look at us, they see IT, and what does IT do? Well, we do all the engineering things. So it's really difficult for us to understand and put ourselves into the shoes, maybe, of the business. And likewise, it's hard for them to understand why we don't deliver faster. Why do our services keep falling over? Why can't we be more dependable? Why can't we move with better velocity and higher reliability? But I think it's not important to ask who is the business, but rather why is the business? Why is the business that you're in existence? Why does the business that you work for, why does it exist? What is it that you do to help that business move forward? And in fact, if you, sitting in this room right now, cannot answer this question, why does my business exist? If you can't answer that question, may I suggest that maybe it's time for you to find a new business to work for. Maybe it's time for you to move on from the company that you're working for and find one where you can answer this question. Why does this business exist? Who are our customers? If you don't care about that, it is definitely time for you to move on. Well, sorry, now that I've told you all to quit your jobs, maybe I should introduce myself briefly. My name is Nathen Harvey. I'm a developer advocate at Google. I am so excited and thankful to be here in this lovely city of Galway today to meet with you this morning. I would also just like to take a minute to thank our friends who are doing the live captioning. I'm not sure the individual that's behind this screen, but I do know that they work at a company called PCR, and I think they're doing a great service to everyone in this room. The first time I went to a conference, The first time I went to a conference that had live captioning, my experience was this. I sat and I got right into my head and I thought, wow, what a great service these organizers have done for the people here that are hard of hearing. Actually, I wonder how many people here are hard of hearing? Oh, I have missed everything that the speaker has just said. Those captions aren't just for those people that are hard of hearing. I can come back out of my head and get right back up to where the presenter was. So I found that to be just fascinating and enlightening. And so I think it's absolutely lovely that you have done this for us here. So DevOps. DevOps is a movement that started 10 years ago. And what's happened in the ensuing decade? Well, we've argued about what does this word mean. What does the word DevOps mean? And in truth, how many of you were doing DevOps before there was a name for it? Yeah, lots of us were. In fact, not only do we argue about what is the name of DevOps, we actually argue about when did we start it. Well, I've been doing DevOps since before there was a DevOps. And I look around this room and I see roughly 200 people. I think if we tried not very hard, we could come up with 300 definitions for this word, DevOps. But here's the truth of the matter. DevOps, I think it's a terrible word, because when we say it and when others hear it, what we hear is dev and ops. And sure, this movement started so that we could bring dev and ops together and have them collaborate. But the truth is, this movement was always about how IT can amplify and support the business. So how do we get better alignment with the organizations that we're working for? How do we help those organizations move forward? How do we help them serve our customers better? That, to me, has always been at the heart of DevOps. And so when we think about DevOps, we really, truly have to think about the entire organization. It's not just dev and ops, not just dev and security and ops. We have to bring in all of the business. It is product management, it is HR, it is finance, it is sales, it is marketing. The whole organization practices DevOps. And this is why I ask that question, why is the business? Why do you get up to work every day and go and do the things that you do? I've been a sysadmin for a long, long time. And there was a point in my career where racking and stacking servers in a data center was my job. But it turns out that was never my job. My job was always to serve the business and to serve our customers. And if you don't care about the customers, please find a way to care or find a new place where you do care about those customers and that mission. I want to tell you a quick story about an online retailer, a story of reliability for this online retailer. So first, when you think about reliability, what does that word even mean? From an operations perspective, we think about the systems that we're working on. We look at our monitors to tell us if our systems are reliable. How many of you have ever been on call? Just keep your hands up for a second. How many of you have ever been woken up for something that didn't matter? Oh, it's the same set of people. How about that? How about that? That's great. You can put your hands down now. Thank you for participating in my hugely scientific survey. As you can tell, we're a big fan of those. So what does it mean for a system to be reliable? I have definitely worked at a place. It's very different than places you've worked. But one time I was working, and I got a call on the weekend from my boss, who had received a call from the CEO. And the CEO told him, hey, listen, sales look off today. I don't know what's going on, but I can tell you something's wrong. And so I, dutifully, went to my computer, pulled up Nagios. Guess what? Everything was green. Nope, boss, no problem. Everything's green. No, there's definitely a problem. The CEO knows it. Yeah, but all our monitors are green, so I think we're good. Anyone felt that way before? Yeah. No, I know you never have, because in truth, it's not our monitors that tell us about the reliability of our system. It's our customers. So I want to tell you this story of an online retailer. I'm going to simplify the heck out of it, but it's going to help illustrate this particular issue that they came across. So what is the business? Why is the business? What do you have to do within an online retail? Well, as a customer, what I want to do is browse your catalog. I want to see the things that are available to buy. I want to be able to select an item, put that item into my shopping cart, and then I want to purchase that item. It's, like I mentioned, a simplified flow, but this is basically what it comes down to. So let's just look at how does that work from a systems perspective or from a flow perspective. Everything that this organization did, like I said, it was an online retailer, so we're doing it all through a browser. When I browse the catalog, I make a request to the server. I ask for the catalog. It sends me back a list of items. When I'm ready to take an item and put it into the shopping cart, this item looks brilliant. I want to buy it. I add to cart. It gives me back a status. That item has been added to the cart. Now, the moment of truth, I'm ready to purchase that. So I go to the checkout page. It gives me back a payment page. I enter in my payment details. I send those payment details off via an API. Maybe it goes off-site to some third party that does the payment processing. And then I get a status back. Your purchase has been made. Your goods are in the mail. Pretty straightforward, and like I said, pretty simplified. Well, in this particular organization, they had a practice of doing operational reviews. So once a week, the operations team would get together, and they would look at all of their charts. They would look at all of their graphs, all of their metrics, figure out how are our systems doing? What's the customer experience like? Is everything working the way that we expect? Let's look around the team. Who got woken up this week? Is there a way that we could have prevented waking you up? Were you woken up for a good reason, or were you woken up to be told something that didn't actually matter? Well, in this particular weekly operational review, they found a bug. They noticed a bug with that final payment process. So when the customer filled in their payment details and then clicked purchase, it went off, got the pay, and it got the status back. What they noticed in this weekly review is the time that it took from the time the customer clicked pay until the time that they got the status back was going up. It was going up. Now, this wasn't a big bug. It was just a little bug because it had to do with latency, right? It's just a little bug. So what did the operations team do? They said, well, we see this. It's a problem, but it's like a slow problem. We see it's a slow burn. It's slowly increasing up. So we know that we should address this problem, but we'll just do it on the side of our desk, if you will. So we're not going to take it on as primary work. We're just going to, maybe carve out a little bit of time to focus on fixing this problem. So they did that. But what happened as they went through to resolve this latency issue is that some of the folks in IT put in extra hours. They worked evenings. They worked weekends. They did this to fix the latency issue. And what happened from the business? The product owners. Well, they kept pushing for features. I want more features. I need you to ship this. I need you to ship that. And IT was getting very frustrated. They're fixing this latency issue that they know is going to cause real problems for the customers, especially as that latency issue gets worse. And the product team is saying, I need a new feature, I need a new feature, I need a new feature, as product teams are wont to do. Well, so what actually ended up happening was that IT did resolve the issue, but now we're starting to show signs of burnout. The team was working extra hours. They weren't able to focus as well as they had previously. And the product management team, well, they were frustrated. The pace of development simply isn't good enough. People aren't moving fast enough. And as it turns out, when I was talking with this particular organization, guess what I discovered? I discovered that IT never told the product owners that there was this latency issue. When later they found out, the product owners in the room said there was not one person on this product management team who would not have prioritized fixing that. But we didn't know. We simply didn't know about it. And this, to me, is the fundamental crux of the problem that we have with DevOps and the thing that we are trying to solve. With DevOps, what we need to do is collaborate with one another. That's always been the case. We need better tools for communication. How do we, on the IT side, talk to the business? And you can look back on your own history of, if you're in ops, how did you start to better talk to dev and learn from dev? If you were dev, how did you talk better to ops and learn from ops? Take those same lessons and let's take them to the business. Now, while DevOps as an industry or as a community was forming, inside of Google, there was this other practice called SRE, or Site Reliability Engineering, that was coming up and being formed and formulated at the same time within Google. Now, the challenge at that time was Google very much wanted to keep those practices inside of our building. We didn't want to talk about the practice of SRE outside in the real world, which was, I guess, understandable, but luckily we came to our senses and published a book about it. In fact, how many of you were here last year at DevOps Days Galway? So perhaps while you were here, you got to meet my colleague, Jennifer Petoff. She gave a great introduction to site reliability engineering at Google. Do you all remember how great that talk was? Just applaud. It was awesome. So thank you to Dr. J for coming out and giving this talk last year. I just want to follow up a little bit on that and talk about using SRE and some of its practices as that communication tool to help solve that issue that I saw at that online retailer. Okay, so within site reliability engineering, there are a couple of key concepts and a framework that we talk about. One is a service level indicator, or an SLI. And at its very basis, an SLI, or a service level indicator, is a metric. But it is true that an SLI is a metric, or every SLI is a metric, not every metric is an SLI. So a service level indicator is really a metric that tells you about the service that your customers are experiencing. So for example, how many of you believe that your customers care what the CPU utilization is on your servers? Right, none of you. Good, good, good. So CPU, how utilized is the CPU right now? That is definitely a metric. How many of you have a monitor on that? Yeah, so many of us. And none of our customers care. Of course we care, because those CPUs, they're precious, and we want to look after them and make sure that they are cared for and fed and loved, but our customers don't care. So an SLI is a metric, but it tells us about the customer experience. So if we go back to this very simple and simplified user flow that we had for that online retailer, what are some of the SLIs that they could look at? Well, they want to look at what are the important pieces that the customer does. So we could have one SLI around browsing the catalog. Maybe, is the catalog available? When I get back a list of items, do I get back the correct list of items? If an item is out of stock, is that handled appropriately? All of these could be SLIs that we would set up. Select an item. When I add an item to the cart, does it end up in the cart? That's a good SLI to look after. And when I ask to check out, do I get the payment page back? Is it correct? Does it ask me for the right details? And so forth. And then, of course, there's the whole, I need to send off this payment off to a third-party processor and get that back. So this organization, and when I say this organization, what I mean is this presentation is going to look at this last item here, where we make that payment off. What does an SLI look like for that? Well, the truth is, to discover your SLIs, it is very beneficial and worthwhile to talk to the product owners. Hey, product owners, tell me about the customer experience. I certainly know how to deploy Kubernetes and how to run that Docker container inside Kubernetes. I can auto-scale it up and down, but what the heck are the customers doing with this application? So maybe the product owner comes in and describes this process to us. We get a better understanding, and we ask about that last piece. And the product owner tells us that the payment page, it should load quickly. We can all agree to that. But as engineers, I can't measure that yet. So I have more questions that I need to ask. I have to ask questions like, how do we define quickly? When does that timer start? When does it end? And for these discussions, perhaps your product owners don't need to be in the room. But we do need to understand from our product owners, what are those critical user journeys? What are the critical things that our customers are trying to get done with the application? Once we understand that, we can then go and discover the service level indicators in our system. So as a team, we sit down, we have to be able to measure this. These are the questions that we're going to ask. So let's come up with this as our SLI. The proportion of HTTP post requests to that API, where I say, here's my payment details, let me post to that. The entire response should be returned within some number of milliseconds, and we're going to measure that at the load balancer. So we know that the customer makes that request, it hits the load balancer, then there's all of these microservices and systems, including third-party systems that we go off and hit. Customer doesn't really care about those. Customer doesn't care about the load balancer either, but that's as close as we can get without changing our application. So we'll measure that at the load balancer, and we'll start to figure out how long does that take. Now, that might be our service level indicator, but we have to set a service level objective for that. So an indicator is a metric, an objective is a goal. What does it mean? How many milliseconds should that take? How many milliseconds are reasonable? And the best thing about SLOs is that we should always set our service level objectives in a lazy way. And the way that I mean by, or what I mean by lazy, is that I want to make sure that a typical customer is kind of happy. I don't want them to be ecstatic. I don't want them to be like, whoo, that was the best purchase experience I ever had. All I want them to be is like, I hit the pay button and I got a status page back. Yep, that's exactly what I expected. I want them to be like happy, but not too happy. If you think back to Rihanna's talk yesterday about our docs, right? I don't need the best checkout times. I need good enough checkout times. So let's make sure that we are good enough, that our customers are happy enough. that if it were any slower, our customers might get angry. We want to be just a little bit faster than that, but not too much faster than that. So let's just get to a place where we can keep the typical customer happy. That's what our objective should be, because we want to have a little bit of wiggle room. So we sat down, we looked at past data for this application, we talked to the business, maybe we talked to or even observed some customers actually using our application, and we came up with a service level objective. So the latency on that transaction, we want it to be less than 500 milliseconds. And we're also going to measure that over a rolling time window. So I want to look back over 28 days. And I'm always going to be looking back over those 28 days. So this is a rolling window that just moves forward with time. And so we talk to our product owners and we ask how many of these should meet that criteria. And they say, well, how much reliability does a product owner want? Anyone have a guess? 100%? You're wrong. You're wrong. It's not 100%. Ask any product owner, how much reliability do you want out of this application? The answer, always, unless they're lying, is 110%. I want 110% reliability from this application. So we talk them down off of that 110% ledge. We say, all right, that's a great opening position for your negotiation, but we're not going to get there. So let's talk about that. We get our product owners for this particular application to agree that 99% of those requests over the past 28 days should be served in less than 500 milliseconds. But we also recognize that, half a second, maybe we can do better. Let's also say that 75% of them should be less than 200 milliseconds, right? We don't want 98.9 of them to be at 499 milliseconds. We think we can do better. So it doesn't really matter what these numbers are. The important piece is that they're driven by what is enough to just make our customers happy, and that they're looking back over a particular time period that is a rolling window. So the other question that we have to ask, though, is to what end are we measuring these service level objectives and these service level indicators? And that's where the error budget comes in. So what is an error budget? The error budget is the difference between 100% and whatever we've set. So in this particular case, where we set a 99% of those requests should be served in less than 500 milliseconds, that means up to 1% of them can take more than 500 milliseconds. And so that 1% is our error budget. But how do we use the error budget? The error budget itself is a principled way for us to define what is an acceptable level of reliability for our system. And more importantly than that, the error budget helps us prioritize where should we put our engineering effort. When I sit down at the beginning of a sprint or an iteration or however you arrange your work, how do we choose which items to work on? Do we work on ship new features? Let's always be shipping new features. Or do we need to work on, let's focus on things that make the system more reliable? The truth is we probably need to focus on both. So what's the balance? What's the mix? The error budget can help indicate that for us or can help define that for us. And it is a communication tool. So we talk with our product owners. We use the term error budget. We describe what it means to them. We get them on board with this. So what are the consequences if we exhaust or overspend that error budget? So we've noticed that latency is it's taking too long. So how are we going to change the system? How are we going to change how we work? Well, if you've read the SRE book, you probably took away from it that the consequence of overspending your error budget is that you freeze feature releases. Stop shipping new features, focus on reliability. How many of you believe that if you went back to your company today and said, hey, product team, we're going to implement an error budget, and the minute you exceed it, we're not shipping any new features, we're only focusing on reliability. Are they open to that? A couple, maybe. Yeah, maybe you're product owners, and you're like, yeah, I believe it. Yeah, most people, that's a little bit much. And while this may be one of your consequences, I argue, or would argue, that it is the most drastic of consequences. We simply can't stop shipping new features. So what are some of the other things that we might do? There are many different things that we could do beyond that. So one thing we could do is prioritize postmortem items. Now, I know this has never happened to you, so let me just share some experience that I've had. We had an incident, a big outage. We went into a postmortem. We brought everyone in. We learned a lot about the system, and we had some action items. These are the things that we're going to get done. We prioritize them. Things are good. Time moves on. It's 3 months later. We had an outage, another incident. We got back together in the room. We learned more about the system, and we created some action items. Oh, they're the same items from the last time. That's never happened to you, right? Never do you define the same action items more than once in a postmortem. But if you've overspent your error budget, maybe that's the indication to the system, to your product owners, that what we need to do is prioritize those. Maybe we need to spend some time improving our automation. Maybe what we do when we overspend our error budget is we don't actually change the work that we're prioritizing, but we ask that an SRE come to every developer stand-up. I've worked with organizations that have done this before. And so the SRE comes to the stand-up. The developer says, I'm working on feature X. And all the SRE does is ask questions. Oh, I see that that's calling off to a third-party payment provider or calling off to another microservice. What is your retry logic? How do you back off if it's getting very slow? These are things that maybe the developers aren't thinking about when they're building that application. Simply having an SRE there helps them think better about the reliability and the operability of the features that they're building. In some organizations, if you're lucky, if you carry the pager and this application is exceeding its error budget, what do? You give the pager back to the developers. You've built a system that I can't reasonably run. You manage it. You built it, you own it. We hand that pager back to the developers. But it's not all bad. The error budget is not only for use when we've exhausted the error budget. We also have to think about how do we use the error budget for good. So how do we use that 1% remaining when we look at that particular SLO? Error budgets can accommodate a lot of different things. They can accommodate releasing new features, of course. If on one hand of this drastic divide, we don't ship new features if we have no error budget, and we only ship features if we have room in our error budget, those are the two things that can balance each other off. But what about expected system changes? What about big, risky releases that you want to do? I've also worked with organizations that have gotten pretty good about using their error budget as a communication tool. When IT comes to the product owners and says, hey, I want to do this thing, and it's going to require a little bit of downtime, product owners are like, wow, that doesn't sound very good. But the developer says, listen, if we make this investment now, we're going to be able to continue to move forward. If we don't make this investment now, that next big feature that you want to release at the end of the quarter, we're not going to have error budget room to release it in. So it can be a great communication tool to get the product owners on board with this. So think of your error budget as a communication tool. It is a great way for you to talk with your product owners, and it is important that you help the product teams use this same language. What is our error budget? How do we prioritize work? We understand that we have to focus on technical items. We understand that there's a thing called technical debt that we have to prioritize. Let's have those conversations. And it is extremely important that you agree on the consequences of an error budget before your next incident, right? It's too late. When you're in an incident, when you've recovered from that incident, it's maybe too late to change your behavior. I encourage you to make this an intentional practice within your organization. And I would posit that you already have an error budget, that you already change the behavior of your organization, but you do it implicitly. Think about the last major outage that you had. How, after that outage, how did your teams change the way that they work? And for how long did that change last? I know, again, in many organizations, we had an outage. The day after that outage, boy, we are super focused on making this system more reliable. 3 days later, it was like a week ago. It's probably fine. A month later, we've completely forgotten about it. Ship new features, ship new features, ship new features. That's your error budget at work. So can we make that more explicit? Can you create an intentional practice around this idea of an error budget? I believe that you can. With that, I want to just let you know that you can download both of these books, the Site Reliability Engineering book and the Site Reliability Workbook. You can read those both online for free. This is a great slide to take a picture of. Of course, we'll be posting all of these slides. With that, I want to say thank you so much for coming out this morning, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
We might have time for one question.
Sure.
Great talk. I guess I get the concept of error budgets, but what does an actual negotiation look like in practice? So am I going in saying we're going to release feature X, it's going to take down the whole system for 2 hours, that's going to drop our response time by 10 milliseconds over the next 28 days?
Right.
Or what does that look like?
Yes, so I think there is a lot of, it's exactly that, it's negotiation. And I think that the important thing is that the error budget it's really giving you an indication. It's helping us understand what is the scope of this actual change. Maybe I need to patch all of my servers, and to do that, I need 10 minutes of downtime per server. Maybe I can then stop and think, well, does that 10 minutes of downtime per server have to mean that it's 10 minutes of downtime for our customers? Or is there a way that I can change how we roll out that change? And then you have those conversations with your product owners, right? So that we can say, listen, I know that you only want us to take 4 hours to run this whole system patch. If we take 12 hours instead of 4, we can have 0 downtime for the customer. So it means you're going to have to slow down on velocity for your feature. Or maybe you have the right decision is, it doesn't matter, we need to get this feature out faster. I'm going to take on that downtime as a product owner. But let's have a transparent and very clear conversation about those trade-offs, right? And it always, for me, that biggest question of this talk is why the business? Why is the business there? Because the business may say, we need 5 nines of availability. Or the business may say, we need to ship this feature, I need 9 5s of availability, right? And it's a trade-off. And as long as we're all open and clear about what those trade-offs are, that's what matters most. Thank you.
I think we'll have to leave it at that.
Yeah, great. I'm around for the rest of the day. There's great time for open spaces. Feel free to grab me at any time as well. Thank you.